You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
And now a word from our sponsor, Netskope. Netskope is a worldwide leader in SASE and Zero Trust. Its unified platform, Netskope One, provides optimized access and Zero Trust security for people, devices, and data anywhere they go, helping customers reduce risk, accelerate performance, and get unrivaled visibility into any cloud, web, and private application activity. To learn more about how Netskope helps customers be ready for anything on their SASE journey, visit netskope.com. Spyware is discovered on U.S. hotel check-in systems. A Microsoft outage affects multiple services. Bitdefender uncovers Unfading Sea Haze. University of Maryland researchers find flaws in Apple's Wi-Fi positioning systems. Scotland's NRS reveals a sensitive data leak. Rapid7 tracks the rise in zero-day exploits and mass compromise events. The SEC hits the operator of the New York Stock Exchange with a $10 million fine. Operation Diplomatic Specter targets political entities in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. The FCC considers AI disclosure rules for political ads. N2K T-Minus Space Daily podcast host Maria Varmazis speaks with guests Brianna, Bace, and Unal, Tatar, sharing their work on legal perspectives on cyberattacks targeting space systems. And tone-blasting underwater data centers. It's Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is your Cyberwire Intel Briefing. Thanks for joining us here today. It's great to have you with us. TechCrunch discovered that the consumer-grade spyware app PC Tattletale was running on the check-in systems of at least 3 Wyndham hotels in the U.S. The spyware continuously captured screenshots of hotel booking systems, exposing guest details and partial payment card numbers due to a security flaw. These screenshots were accessible to anyone online who knew how to exploit the flaw. Security researcher Eric Daigle found the compromised systems during an investigation into spyware, often called stalkerware, due to its use in tracking individuals without their consent. Despite his attempts to notify PC Tattletale, the flaw remains unfixed. The app's presence on the hotel systems is unclear. It could be due to employees being tricked into installing it or intentional use by hotel management for monitoring. Wyndham, a franchise organization, stated that its hotels are independently owned and operated, and did not confirm if it was aware of PC Tattletale's use. PC Tattletale markets itself for monitoring children and employees, but also promotes its use for tracking unfaithful spouses. The spyware requires physical access to install, and PC Tattletale offers a service to install the spyware on target devices remotely. The company has not responded to requests for comment. A major Microsoft outage has affected Bing.com, Copilot for web and mobile, Copilot on Windows, ChatGPT Internet Search, and DuckDuckGo. The outage began at around 3 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, primarily impacting users in Asia and Europe. While Bing Search works via direct URL, the home page showed a blank page or a 429 error. Copilot services were completely offline. DuckDuckGo displayed error messages due to Bing API issues. Microsoft and OpenAI are investigating the cause, and it seems at this time systems have been restored. Bitdefender Labs uncovered a new cyber threat actor, Unfading Sea Haze, targeting high-level organizations in South China Sea countries, likely aligned with Chinese interests. Their attacks, spanning back to 2018, primarily hit military and government targets. Using tools like Ghostrat variants and .NET payloads, they exploited poor credential hygiene and inadequate patching. Unfading Sea Haze's persistence and sophisticated tactics, such as spear phishing with malicious LNK files, highlight the need for robust cybersecurity practices. Despite 5 years of activity, they remained undetected, underscoring the importance of vigilant security measures. Researchers at the University of Maryland, go Terps, identified a privacy vulnerability in Apple's Wi-Fi positioning system, enabling global tracking of users' locations and movements. This vulnerability allows attackers to build a worldwide database of Wi-Fi access points quickly. The study shows the potential for mass surveillance and tracking, including in sensitive areas like war zones and disaster sites. Researchers recommend enhanced privacy measures such as rate limiting, authentication for WPS queries, BSSID randomization, and opt-out options. Apple has started addressing these issues, but more comprehensive solutions are needed to protect against unauthorized tracking of Wi-Fi access points. National Records of Scotland, the NRS, revealed that sensitive data was leaked following a ransomware attack on NHS Dumfries and Galloway, resulting in 3 terabytes of data being published on the dark web. The breach included demographic records and patient information held temporarily on the NHS network. Less than 50 individuals were directly impacted and have been contacted. The attack by the Inc. ransom gang increased identity theft risks. The incident is under investigation by Police Scotland. Rapid7's 2024 Attack Intelligence Report highlights the continued rise in zero-day exploits and mass compromise events, often combined. Key findings include more than half of new widespread threat CVEs being exploited before patches are available, indicating that mass supply chain compromises through zero-day vulnerabilities will persist. The report also notes the professionalization of cybercriminals who buy zero-day exploits. Additionally, it emphasizes the critical need for multi-factor authentication, as 40% of incidents investigated in 2023 resulted from missing or inconsistent MFA enforcement. Rapid7 stresses the importance of prevention, particularly at the network edge, and proactive defensive measures. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission announced that Intercontinental Exchange, ICE, will pay a $10 million fine for charges related to a 2021 cyber attack. Hackers exploited a zero-day vulnerability on one of ICE's VPNs, planting malicious code. ICE, which operates the New York Stock Exchange, delayed notifying legal and compliance officials at its subsidiaries, hindering proper disclosure. The SEC criticized this delay, emphasizing the need for immediate notification. ICE agreed to the fine without admitting or denying the findings. Palo Alto Networks Unit 42 describes a Chinese advanced persistent threat group dubbed Operation Diplomatic Specter, which has targeted political entities in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia since late 2022. They've conducted espionage against at least 7 governmental entities, using rare email exfiltration techniques to collect sensitive information from diplomatic missions, embassies, military operations, political meetings, ministries, and high-ranking officials. The group employs unique backdoors named Tunnel Specter and Suite Specter. Their tactics include exploiting Exchange server vulnerabilities to infiltrate mail servers, emphasizing the need for organizations to patch known vulnerabilities. FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel proposes examining whether campaigns and political action committees should disclose when political ads on radio and TV use AI-generated content. This comes after AI-generated robocalls mimicking President Biden discouraged New Hampshire primary voters from casting their votes. If supported by the other commissioners, the FCC will seek public input on requiring broadcasters to disclose AI use in political ads and define AI-generated content. The proposal aims to ensure transparency and prevent voter deception in the 2024 election cycle. Coming up after the break, our N2K T-Minus Space Daily podcast host Maria Varmazis speaks with Brianna, Bace, and Unal, Tatar, sharing their work on legal perspectives on cyberattacks targeting space systems. Stay with us. In the dynamic world of enterprise security, identity architects and IT leaders face a major challenge. Growth by repeated acquisitions multiplies the complexity of everything. Multiple IDPs, MFA providers, policy engines that all need to coexist. This can lead to fragmented user identities and policies that create security vulnerabilities and add access friction. Strata Identity solves this. Now you can decommission unneeded IDPs and consolidate the ones you'd like to keep without rewriting apps or disrupting users, engineers, and app owners. Plus, Strata's modular architecture makes it easy to integrate with any identity provider without manual maintenance and coding. Join the ranks of cybersecurity leaders using identity orchestration. Visit strata.io/cyberwire, share your top identity security priorities, and receive a pair of complimentary AirPods Pro. Offer valid for organizations with over 5,000 employees. Step into a new era of identity management at strata.io/cyberwire. The IT world used to be simpler. You only had to secure and manage environments that you controlled. Then came new technologies and new ways to work. Now, employees, apps, and networks are everywhere. This means poor visibility, security gaps, and added risk. That's why Cloudflare created the first-ever connectivity cloud. Visit cloudflare.com to protect your business everywhere you do business. My N2K colleague and host of the T-Minus Space Daily podcast recently caught up with her guests, Brianna, Bace, and Unal, Tatar, sharing their work on legal perspectives on cyberattacks targeting space systems.
We investigated in case of a cyber attack targeting a space infrastructure. This can be a ground system or this can be a satellite system. What would be the legal tools we have in responding to this? And in writing this paper, you need to bring an interdisciplinary perspective because there are some technical aspects of the cyber attacks and the laws, how they apply for this situation. And these laws are not created. The international law of armed conflict, the international space law, these are not created by considering the cyber attacks targeting, because there was no cyber attacks at this time. These are the reasons we analyzed this domain and we created several scenarios. Actually, Brianna can give more information. I brought my expertise in creating the cyber attack scenarios and their technical details. Brianna and our third co-author is a lawyer, brought their legal expertise, and then together we wrote this paper.
Yes, Brianna, why don't we, please go ahead.
My name is Brianna Bace. I'm a graduate of the University at Albany in New York. I hold a bachelor's degree in emergency preparedness, homeland security, and cybersecurity, and a master's degree in public administration and policy. So in the paper, just as a little bit of a brief synopsis, we created 3 realistic cyber attack scenarios in which the attackers were targeting space infrastructures, and that includes orbital and terrestrial infrastructure. And in each of the scenarios, a principle of international law was violated. So without going into too much detail about the principles themselves, we looked at the principle of sovereignty, the principle of non-intervention, and the principle on the prohibition of use of force. And in each of the scenarios, we created them in such a way where that principle was violated. And this was to demonstrate that international law can in fact be violated by cyber attacks, including on space infrastructure. Though, as we could talk about later, we ran into some of the common complexities when it comes to applying law to cyber, including the issue of attribution.
Yeah. Would it be too much to indulge me if you could actually talk about each of those scenarios? Because I had the privilege of reading the paper, and I know we want people to read it. I know we don't want to give too much away, but they're really fascinating scenarios. I think it'd be really cool for people to hear a bit about what you all worked on and came up with, because I thought it was very interesting.
The creation of the realistic scenarios is very important. They are hypothetical scenarios, obviously. We are not using the real nations or real attackers. But when creating these scenarios, making them realistic, although they are hypothetical, is very important. So when we're creating, we reviewed recent cyber attacks against space infrastructures, also recent cyber attack trends in IT systems, which can be replicated soon in the space infrastructure. So we created our scenarios based on that. And these realistic scenarios actually can be very useful because these scenarios we created can be used to play some tabletop exercise later by the readers if they prefer to use it.
Brianna, anything to add to that?
So scenario 1, we focused on the principle of sovereignty. And in this scenario, we framed it as a state aerospace manufacturing facility being hit with cyber attack. And the violation occurs because the attack actually caused certain systems to be permanently damaged and you needing to replace that software and hardware. You have the second scenario, we focused on the principle of non-intervention. That was, in that case, you have the two aspects of non-intervention. So you have the attack bearing on the matters of the state. So in this case, we had it where a master control station as part of the GPS system was hacked and they couldn't access the data that was being sent from the satellite. And the attackers said that they would not provide the data and it would actually continue their attack throughout the system. Unless the state that was attacked changed their policy, which is an aspect of non-intervention, that coercion element. And then our third scenario was focusing on that principle of prohibition of use of force. And for that one, you had a cyber attack causing real physical damage and injury to the state. And that, again, is what led to that violation.
Fascinating. So you mentioned the complexities that came up here when looking into this, not just from the cyber side, but also space law, which, as I cover a lot on the show, there's a lot of gaps there, and it causes a lot of frustration, understandably. And I know that's the same in the cyber world, too, where technology is just far outpaced legislation pretty much across the board. Any commonalities in those gaps that you found, or are they unique to each sphere? Or what did you find there?
So I think the problem of attribution is probably the widest. Wherever you're looking at cyber attacks, whatever domain you're looking at, that attribution issue is going to occur, especially when applying international law, because international law is based on state responsibility and accountability. And the way you prove state responsibility or that a state has committed a wrongful act is making that attribution. And it's not only important for just the accusing the state or blaming the state, taking the blame and all of that, but you have attribution required so that you can move down the process of those legal regimes and responses, like cessation, the guarantees of non-repetition, and reparations. All of that can't happen unless you have that violating state and you make that attribution that they're the ones that did it.
This is a very basic question, and Brianna, I'll just stay with you for a second. This is a legal question. When there's an attack that affects a ground system, a space ground system, or a facility that is space-related but on the ground, and that then affects later something that is on orbit, is there a distinction in terms of the law about the physical domains that are being affected there, or is it looked at just systematically?
From what I've found, you look at who owns that space asset. So even though it's in space where there is no sovereignty, that asset belongs to a nation, and that's what you're looking at in terms of territoriality when it comes to applying the law.
Okay, so so in my mind, I'm overcomplicating things. Okay, so that's good to know.
And just kind of, I think a lot of people think when they're looking at international law and applying it to space that it is overly complicated. But what I found from doing this paper is that you can apply those existing frameworks. It's just, and you kind of have to step back and not overcomplicate it and see that, oh, well, even though we are talking about space, someone owns that infrastructure, and that helps to apply the law.
Yeah, I imagine the complication comes into situations where it's not as clear about who owns what, although right now in space that's not usually an issue, but we've seen with things like space debris, it does become an issue because we don't know where that debris comes from. But attribution can mean two very different things in the cyber and space world, but it's amazing how much that's still an issue. Unal, I see you want to add something to this.
Yeah, I think attribution is an important issue for, when the internet was created first, security was not a design principle. Because it was the internet was created for trusted parties, known people, known entities to use it, and it was not for commercial purposes. So now we're still trying to fix the underlying protocols because there are protocol vulnerabilities, and still it's really hard to fix them because the whole internet is running on them. I think space is not very different than this. When space was created, it was mostly for the nation's use. The commercialization was low, maybe, and more defense purposes. But now we are living in a very different era. So the dual use of this technology is huge. And since these systems and protocols were not designed for security purposes, the space engineers, they don't take security until recently, this is what I can say, as a design principle, because it's in the orbit, so we don't need to worry about it. People will not physically get into it. But the things are changing now. We see the cyber attacks. And now, in order to respond to it, you need to attribute who did it to deter them, to follow up what happened. And then, but the systems, I think, in the secure by design principles should be more applied in the space system development. And then we can see the attribution is more possible in these systems.
Some great points in what you just said, and my mind can't help but go back to Viasat 2022, that attack, and how much the fallout from that just revealed that commercial companies need to understand that cybersecurity in their direction is such a priority.
Some critical infrastructure domains, such as energy, they were the victim of cyber attacks very long time ago, and over time, they in this sector adopted some cybersecurity principles. And then minimum security requirements. Some other sectors like maritime, they are coming back later. Space is one of the newest ones which introduced cybersecurity in their domain.
Very quickly, yeah.
Yeah, very quickly. And with the geopolitical conflicts going around the world, it wouldn't be a surprise to see more of this cyber attacks against space infrastructures.
Indeed. Yeah. I wondered if you could also walk us through you had mentioned these are hypothetical scenarios, and I want to emphasize these are hypothetical, but potential technical threats in the cybersecurity domain that would affect space systems. You mentioned a few of them in the paper.
I think maybe we need to differentiate space system cybersecurity and the traditional IT system cybersecurity because they are running in different domains. The space systems composed of different layers, like link layer, ground systems, space systems. So each of them runs different protocols. In the traditional IP systems, we are running on the IP domain. But in the space systems, the ground systems, yes, they have IP, especially with the user interfaces. But later, it is the radio frequency, RF signals. So you need to understand the RF space engineering concepts to attack these systems. But since it is radio frequency, the attribution is way harder. And with the software-defined radio, you can easily implement with low cost these systems and then try to attack these systems.
And that absolutely opens things up to the attribution becomes nigh impossible. I'm sure not technically impossible, but very, very hard. This is, again, I want to emphasize we want people to read the paper, so I don't want to give too much away. I'd love to hear from you both about the sort of the conclusions and takeaways from this paper that you would like people to know.
I think for folks in the space industry, it is obvious that security should be a design principle in mind for building security, not bolt-on security to be done later, because it's really hard for space systems. They are embedded systems, they are on space, so physically you cannot reach them to update them. So security should be integrated as a design requirement at the first place for developing the space systems. I think this is one thing they need to know. And for space policy experts, they need to understand the landscape, the cyber threat landscape, and what kind of cyber attacks can be done so they can get prepared in responding to these attacks.
That's a great point. Brianna, how about you?
I agree with everything Unal said. I would also add, in addition to the technical cybersecurity, you also have just emphasis on training your employees, training your staff, because you always have that human factor. They're always going to be a vulnerability. So making sure that they're prepared and they know how to handle themselves and they have that security knowledge in face of attack.
Fantastic point. I could not agree more on that. That's a really good point. And maybe we flip the question now for cybersecurity folks who've been in this field for a long time and they're like, oh yeah, different new flavor or same flavor, different day, something like that of cyber attacks. What's different about what you found in the space arena? Is it just the policy of things? Is it's space? Is it actually is it an erroneous question that I'm asking? Is it any different really?
Yeah, I can give some perspective for the cybersecurity professionals from technical perspective, and then maybe Brianna can follow up with the more on policy and law perspective. From the technical perspective, there is a lot to do in the cyber domain, in the space domain for cybersecurity. So I think we need to see more cybersecurity experts working closely with the space systems engineers, because you need to understand the domain and what a cyber vulnerability can impact the system. So you need to have the understanding of the domain. And traditional, regular cybersecurity experts don't have this expertise about space systems. They need to gain this information. And with this, they can speak the language of the space engineers who develop the systems. And the space engineers, if they have some understanding of the cyber threats and vulnerabilities, so these two groups can connect and then understand each other. Now, I can say that there's a disconnect. Yeah, the focuses are completely different. The cybersecurity people, they are not very familiar with the technical infrastructure of the space systems. Space engineers, they are not familiar with the cyber threats. So there is a communication gap. I think both of them need to learn the other domain and at least the basics of it so they can communicate and work together.
Sure. Speaking more towards the legal aspect of it, I think when it comes to applying international law to cyber, there's still a lot of work to be done, and there are a lot of efforts taking place, including our own research. I think it's important when you're applying these principles to know exactly when you're meeting certain thresholds of force or intervention. A lot of that is still unclear, like what types of cyber attacks meet that threshold of use of force, or what type of cyber attacks are actually a prohibited intervention. We have some widely accepted ideas of what those are, and we use those in the scenarios to create the violations. But there are so many different types of cyber attacks and so many different ways that they can happen that I think really understanding how those can violate, or whether or not those violate international law is important, because the more clearly defined our legal boundaries, the better, because that's policymakers and world leaders, they're using those legal definitions and laws to make decisions. So it's very important that they're as clearly defined as possible.
Be sure to check out the T-Minus Space Daily podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And now, a word from our sponsor, 6 Sense. 6sense provides award-winning cloud-based automated endpoint and vulnerability management solutions to streamline IT and security operations. With its advanced platform, businesses gain complete visibility and control over their infrastructure, reducing IT and security risks and optimizing operational efficiency. With 6sense, you'll get real-time alerts, risk-based vulnerability prioritization and remediations, and an intuitive automation and orchestration engine so you can focus on your core business goals, confident in the knowledge that your enterprise is secure, compliant, and running smoothly. To learn why enterprises choose 6sense, visit 6sense.com. And finally, for nearly a decade, underwater data centers have been the cutting-edge trend in tech, boasting numerous perks like saving land space and benefiting from natural cold water cooling. From Microsoft's Project Natick to China's Hainan Undersea Data Center, these aquatic facilities have promised efficiency and durability. But turns out there's a catch. They're vulnerable to sound waves. Yes, you heard that right. Researchers from the University of Florida and the University of Electrocommunications in Japan discovered that a simple swimming pool speaker playing a high D note can wreak havoc on these submerged data hubs. The dense water not only cools the servers, but also carries sound waves that can disrupt their operations. Researchers tested this in both a lab water tank and a campus lake, finding that just 2.5 minutes of targeted acoustic attack could increase database latency by up to 92.7%. Solutions like soundproof panels and active noise cancellation proved either too hot or too expensive. But not to worry, they're working on a machine learning algorithm to detect and counteract these watery whales. As UF professor Kevin Butler put it, the ocean is awash in sound already. These attacks can happen inadvertently, like from a submarine sonar blast. So, while the sea may seem serene, it's a whole new battleground for data security. I just hope that pod of killer whales that's been taking down yachts don't catch wind of this. And that's the Cyberwire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to cyberwire@n2k.com. We're privileged that N2K Cyberwire is part of the daily routine of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K makes it easy for companies to optimize your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your teams smarter. Learn how at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Stokes. Our mixer is Trey Hester, with original music and sound design by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Brandon Karpf. Simone Petrella is our president, Peter Kilpie is our publisher, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Hey listeners, we're always looking for ways to improve the N2K Cyberwire network and maintain the intelligence-driven news experience that keeps you in the know on the latest developments in cybersecurity. We've launched our 2024 audience survey and would love for you to take a few minutes to share your feedback. And hey, there's even a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card if you complete the survey. Visit cyberwire.com/survey. That's cyberwire.com/survey and share your feedback now.